So today's topic is going to be grandiose delusions. We're really going to be thinking about them from a theoretical standpoint or from a formulation standpoint of a delusion that acts as a way of trying to defend the individual. Delusion, as we call it, delusion as defense. My name is Dr. Aaron Brinen. I am an assistant professor at Drexel's College of Medicine in their Department of Psychiatry, where I get to lead a center where we disseminate and develop and study recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. And I've been very lucky over the time during the isolation to partner with Peak and people in LA and people all over in getting to put out this series of webinars where we're just taking off little digestible pieces of this approach along the way. So I'm very excited to do that. So the purpose of today is to review the psychological theory around grandiose delusions, develop some strategies, thinking about some interventions to do. The not purpose, again, we're not going to be really talking about how medicines are going to work or about how we're going to use psychoeducation. That's really not the purpose of today, and it's not really going to be where we're going to take care of it. Okay, so why talk about grandiose delusions, right? I think one of the big reasons we want to think about grandiose delusions is that these individuals can become really difficult to engage. It can be really hard to get them to come in. I mean, listen, if I think that I'm God, well, God doesn't need a psychotherapist, right? If I'm the CEO of a company, I'm too busy. I don't have time for therapy sessions. And why do I need therapy? I'm the CEO of a company. So all of a sudden, there's no real logic for you. There's no real benefit for what you do. This person's doing pretty well. They're a CEO, they're Superman, they're God, they're a record producer. Why would they need to come to therapy, right? And so it can get really hard to start coming up with a rationale of, helping somebody to get better when they don't really see any reason to get better. And logically, if you think about it, if you were a record producer or a CEO, why would you need therapy? Would you go to therapy to get rid of being a millionaire? I wouldn't. Not that I'm aiming to be a millionaire in my life, but if it happened, I wouldn't, go to therapy to make that go away. So it sort of doesn't make a lot of sense, therapy. The other reason we want to think about it is that these individuals stay in the hospital. When they fall into the hospital, in my experience, they're not the ones that just sort of, by hook or by crook find their way out. They're usually the ones who get stuck in there for a really long time. They're oftentimes the ones who are rejecting treatment. Families can really struggle with grandiose delusions. They just really defy all logic. When somebody goes, I'm a really important millionaire and a billionaire, the family goes, really? Well, then why are you living in my basement? And so they can really struggle, and it can get frustrating. The first time somebody talks about inventing new medicine, it's cute. The 800th time they talk to you about this new medicine that they developed, it gets old. So it makes sense that families might struggle with these individuals. In my experience, I don't find that the medicine does a whole lot to help individuals. Also, there's no logical reason to take medicine to stop you from being a world famous genius, right? And so nobody would take medicine to stop you from being bulletproof. And so whether it's that the medicine isn't really helping or whether there's no real logic for me to take the medicine, regardless, it just doesn't work out really well for that for the individual. So these are the reasons to think about grandiose delusions. So what are they? Let's start to think about this. Grandiose delusions. I think the best way to think about it is it's a belief in one's own greatness. They're going to be individuals will think that they have some special abilities. They're famous. They're important. They have this immense power. These are the people who own your hospital, who are the governor. They're the president. They're a super genius. They're a millionaire or a billionaire or quadrazillionaire. They might be somebody really famous. They might believe that they are, that they're God, right? They might believe that they're, Boris Yeltsin, right? Whatever. But they have this belief around it. As we talk about it, some of the ways that we're going to be thinking about grandiose delusions, we're going to widen the net even a little bit more than the traditional definition of grandiose delusions. And really, we're going to look at it sort of functionally, right? Anytime we see that the delusion is acting to defend the individual's self-esteem, right? It's almost working as sort of like uh, almost like a shield, like for them to protect their negative self-esteem. That's what we're going to be talking about here. This idea of a delusion as a defense. So the initial way that we're going to get into it is this question of, what's good about it, right? What's good about this delusion, right? So if somebody says that they're an inventor, what's good about what's good about inventing, the electric car? And so, what do you get? What can you do? Those questions that we're going to ask when somebody says, I'm God, and I say, what's good about being God? Whatever their answer is, it's going to both tell us what need is being met by the delusion, as well as the opposite of it will give us a little bit of a glimpse into what some of the potential negative beliefs are, what those sort of core beliefs might be that the delusion is defending against. Any belief that defends the negative belief, any belief that defends the negative belief is going to be considered, right? So any type of delusion, so that might be somebody who, believes that they're pregnant or has a million babies, or that everybody on a team is their sons, right? Any of these other ones where the delusion or the belief is defending against this negative belief, we're going to consider and we're going to target with this approach. So let's think about it. What's good about being the mayor of a city, right? Let's say somebody says that they're the mayor or they're the governor of New York State. And so what we might ask is, what's good about being, I might ask all of you guys, what's good about being the governor of New York State? Right. Let's think about it. Right. People have to listen to you. People will respect you. People will value you. And people will think that you're smart, right? So that's some of the things that's good about that. Also, by the way, when we're looking at it, I've not colluded with anybody's delusion. I asked you guys what's good about being the governor of New York State, and you listed all of those things. So if being the governor of New York State means that people are going to be listening to me and respecting me and valued and smart, right? If that's the benefit that I get from being the governor of a state, we're all going to agree that if you believe that you're the governor of New York State, that people in your family have told you that you're not, right? We all agree that the individuals that we serve have been told many times that they're not the governor, they're not God, they own no property, right? They've been told this over and over and over again. And so clearly, this is serving a purpose because it doesn't feel good to get told that you're wrong. So if these are what it's defending, if this is the benefit that you get, that you see yourself as listened to, let's start thinking about how does this person see themselves most of the time. So if the delusion provides the sense that you're being listened to, you might see yourself as oftentimes being ignored. If it means that you're respected, disrespected, maybe being disposable and stupid. So if that's the way that I see myself most of the time, then it makes sense that I'm going to have this desire to be listened to and respected, right? I'm going to have this desire that people will value me or see me as smart. And so the delusion defends it. It acts like a force field that sort of pushes away any of the times that these beliefs around being ignored and disrespected and disposable are activated. So the more this side, listened to, respected, valued, smart, is activated, the less governor that I get. The more the sense of being ignored and disrespected, disposable, and stupid get activated, right? The more governor I should get. So think about it. When I talk to my family about the fact that I'm the governor of New York, um, and they tell me, no, you're not, you're being silly, you live in my basement. If you were the governor of New York, wouldn't you have a better place to live than my basement? We're really activating that sense of disrespected, disposable, even stupid. So as those get activated, I respond back with more governorosity, right? And the more governorosity I respond to, the more the harsher my family gets. The harsher my family gets, and not because they're bad people. Many of these families are just absolute, you know, gems. These people who care deeply for their loved one. But the more, but listen, I've been trapped in the house with my family for whatever 4 or 5 weeks now. There's definitely things that like the patience level is done. So think about being trapped, even outside of the isolation, but being with your loved one. They keep telling you how important they are as the governor of New York. After a while, you're going to be like, okay, I'm done with this. How could you be the governor? Right? Governors don't eat all my food. The governor puts away his coffee mug, right? And we do that. But as we activate that side about being disrespected, disposable, stupid, the individual responds back with more. We charge up this belief around being the governor, and so it's this really horrible cycle that we can end up in. So how do we elicit this stuff? Let's think about when do we sort of pull these ideas out? Where are these plants growing from? Um, the time that we want to do it, because if we really think about it, asking a lot about delusions is sort of just, it's like we're putting the light on the plant and growing all the weeds, right? And so we don't want to be going after and targeting the delusion when it's really not activated. So the times when it's good to ask that question, sort of what's good about being the governor of New York, um, there are times where we can't do any of the normal CTR protocol to get around that delusion, right? So ultimately, the individual is constantly sort of tapping us in these negative ways, right? So if they're constantly talking to us about being the governor, it's a great time to go. Um, what's good about being the governor of New York? What are you able to do? What are you able to get? I'm just curious. And we ask that question exactly that way. What's good about being the governor of New York? And then the individual responds, and we get a little bit more data, which will inform how we're going to activate the individual. It will also inform some of the other possible formulations that are driving the sense of being the governor of New York. The other thing is when it sort of just first comes up, if we just meet the person, might not be blocking a whole lot, but if it just comes up quickly, we could ask the question quickly to get some data as we start. So what's good about being the governor of New York? And then we really want to get a strong definition. Whatever the individual says, I can bring people together, people will listen to me, right? What would be good about bringing people together and having them listen to you? Really get a nice, strong understanding of it. We don't have to accept just the first thing that they say. We can keep returning the individual back to it. And once we have a real vivid idea of it, we're going to be able to choose the interventions that we want to have a little bit easier. So that's how we start getting the formulation developed. The nice thing about grandiosity is every time you do an intervention, it creates data that we can evaluate our formulation. And with those new data, we can develop a new intervention. With that new intervention, we gather more data. So we end up in this wonderful cycle of learning. So the strategy we're going to look about in grandiosity is we're going to shift the way we do things, because this idea of disproving or contradicting the any delusion really is extremely difficult, right? It's excessively difficult. Oftentimes it does not work. I was just on a supervision call with somebody in China, and that we were laughing about if telling somebody it wasn't true worked, there'd be like 3 of us that traveled around the world and just walked in and said, "It's not true. It's not true." The families have done it a bunch of times, so they would have solved the problem a long time ago if telling people things weren't true worked, right? If we could just disprove the delusion through facts and figures, it would have happened a long time ago. The problem with grandiosity is sometimes the very challenging of the belief provides the answer that it's true. So, for example, if somebody tells me I'm not the governor of, I'm not the governor of New York City, then all of a sudden I go, well, of course, why would you argue with me about being the governor? Why would you be arguing with me about being the governor of New York State if I wasn't the governor of New York State, right? If I said, I had superpowers, I'd go, sure, of course. The only reason you're taking time out to argue with me is that I must be a superhero, and so now I just need to figure that thing out. If the other part of it is oftentimes people respond to the disrespect. So somebody argues with me that maybe I'm not a judge. I go, how dare you talk to me that way? That's out of order. Or even the governor of New York State. Why would you talk to me that way when I have all of this really difficult corona stuff to go on and you're burdening me with arguing with me about whether I'm the governor or not? Obviously, I'm the governor. Look at all the important work I need to do. And so what happens is the individual argues with you about the basis or the process by which you are arguing with them, and they're not really looking at the fact of whether it's true or whether it's not true. And really, the more we argue with really any delusion, the more we strengthen the belief. And let's take an example out of all of our own lives. Think about the last time you ended up in some sort of political argument, right? Maybe it was a holiday, and you were sitting, and maybe you have an uncle or an aunt who likes to argue about politics. And really think about the fact, they take you to task, they argue and argue and argue. My question is this: did your belief change by the end of the argument? Did you feel stronger about what you were arguing about? Same is going to be true for our individuals. Also, when we're thinking about this idea of a delusion as a defense, oftentimes the very challenging of the delusion will be activating the beliefs that make the delusion stronger. So we're ultimately caught in this really negative thing. I think the other part, and this is really important, is that there's a potential danger to challenging of the delusions. Because if you think about, you remember that activity we did where I said, what's good about being the governor of New York State? At the end of that, if you were able to successfully prove to me that I was not the governor of New York State, all I'm left with is that I'm stupid, ignored, devalued, and disrespected. And so there have been reports of cases where people were, for some reason, able to disprove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the grandiose delusion wasn't true. And some of those people have gone home and completed suicides. So there's no real upside to disproving a grandiose delusion. So just to keep that in mind as we're going into that. Also, a little self-check on all of us. It's really quite addictive arguing with people. And so the more we get into this, we're going to disprove the delusion thing. It can kind of become fun. We can sort of get into and miss the fact that this is somebody's belief. And it kind of the strategy that we're going to talk about kind of goes back to the old adage that we all remember from school, which is never take away a coping skill until you give somebody a different coping skill, or never take away a coping strategy so you provide them with a different coping strategy. Disproving the grandiose delusion is removing their coping strategy. So there's sort of this sort of 5-part approach to it. And so we're also going to go through it's not just one slide. So the strategy around grandiosity is really going to start by meeting the need. We're going to meet the need that delusion is doing, so we deactivate the grandiose delusion. So if we go back to being governor of New York State, we want to meet that need of being listened to and valued and respected. And so we're going to really work hard to sort of to activate those beliefs so the individual does not need the grandiose delusion to draw to meet that need. So the first part is deactivating the delusion, and we want to do that pretty predictably. Once we do that, we want to start getting the individual to independently meet that need, right? So we're going to continue to do the same type of activities that's deactivating the grandiose delusion in a way so that way the individual continues to meet that need on their own. Once we have that going on, we want to start correcting the behaviors the individual is engaging in. And not that they're doing bad things, but there are sort of ways that we all act that are not super helpful and could actually be increasing the likelihood of these beliefs being activated. Then we really, at that point, we're going to start correcting the beliefs that are underlying the delusion, and then the connecting of the behaviors and the beliefs. So ultimately, the long-term strategy of helping people who have these types of delusions as a defense, the long-term strategy is to essentially um, redirect the energy flow so that way the individual's not regularly setting off those beliefs, right? Is not regularly energizing the beliefs that lead to the grandiose delusion. So we're going to come in an opposite direction. That way, as somebody meets those needs, that bucket, it remains filled, right? So ultimately, if we think about needs as a bucket, right? We're either, there's one of two problems. One is that somebody's filling their bucket, but there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket, so the water's coming out. And so they're constantly needing to fill that bucket. The other thing is that there's something blocking them from filling the bucket. And so ultimately, all of these need experiences that they're having never get into the bucket, so they never meet that need. And so ultimately, we either need to figure out a way to make sure that they're filling their bucket or that their bucket remains filled. And that's going to be the ultimate strategy down the road. That work is easier to do once we've met the need and the delusion is deactivated. So now we're going to get into how we get about that process. Not to be surprised, we're going to really think about the CTR protocol. This idea of activation, identifying the aspirations for the person, and then activity and action. So grandiosity and activation. We're going to really work at priming these competing beliefs, right? What we, if we really think about beliefs as one time Christine Pedesky pointed this out to me. It was a really beautiful way of thinking about it, is that beliefs can come in pairs, almost like muscles come in pairs. And when you contract a muscle, the other one releases, right? But then when you contract this muscle releases. So we're going to think about these competing beliefs, so that way we release the competing muscle. The other part is that as we activate a competing belief, it's less likely to activate this other belief. So we're going to really work on activation. And think about it. There's lots of things that we can do in activation that would work in that way. So for example, going back to the example of believing that you're the governor of New York City or governor of New York State. Keep mixing up governor and mayor. It's really nice. So if I believe that I'm the governor of New York State, because that means that people listen to me and value me. If we start sharing recipes together and I ask you the best way to make tomato sauce, it might seem like it's really small, but if you explain to me how to make tomato sauce and you talk to me about the things I need to be careful of, am I listening to you in that moment? Am I respecting you? Do you have value? Yeah, all of those things are true. And it's also not in this sort of fantastical way. It's really amazing once you get into doing this type of work with grandiosity, that there, in order to deactivate a grandiose delusion, you don't need to meet it with equally as huge of an activation. And so I've seen people who believe that they're a governor, and then helping out to with let's say a cat, and changing the litter box and being allowed to being part of changing the litter box ultimately meets that need, and that shocked me. And so finding those ways of activating people with activities together, asking questions, listening to music together. These are ways that we're going to start priming this competing belief. It starts to meet the need of the delusion. So if the need of being the governor of New York State is that I'm important, if we can meet that need as we do activation together, that's going to be beneficial. It also reduces the defensiveness, right? If we're listening to music together, or even if we're arguing about tomato sauce and what's the best tomato to get, um, I'm not as defensive because I'm sitting here and I'm really having this good conversation with you. If we're listening to music together, I don't have to worry about the fact that you're about to attack me about the fact that I'm not the governor. When we feel less defensive, we feel our stress level goes down, and we're not looking and trying to find out when are you going to pull a switch on me. As we engage in these activities, it becomes a test to see, can we do these activities at other times? So if we enjoy talking about recipes, well, who else are you talking about to recipes about? If we enjoy going on a walk together, well, who else are you going for a walk with? And so the things that we do together that help you to feel better, those then can become a template for doing activities during the week and at other times. That brings us to aspirations. When we really think about getting those personal, meaningful, valued goals, those big picture aspirations, ultimately what the aspiration does is it starts the process of replacing the delusion, right? So if being the governor of New York State makes me important, I'm going to find something else in my life to make me important. If being the governor of New York State means that people listen to me, I'm going to find other ways in which people are going to listen to me. And so the aspiration starts to replace it. We don't lay it out as sort of like a one-for-one trade, being like, listen, we'll get you into an apartment if you give up being the governor. That is not the way that we go about it. Ultimately, what we're really looking at is trying to meet the need in the short run. So that way, in the long run, I don't need it anymore. Right? Sort of gives it away in that way. Ultimately, we're going to start to increase that sense of connection. Aspirations, if we're working on the aspirations together, then we're a team, which means the person's not alone. And that's going to meet a lot of the needs that the delusion's going to be defending against. It also gives that ongoing activation of competing beliefs. So if we're talking about having my own apartment or teaching my kids how to cook and being in my kids' lives again, that's going to have that ongoing sense of being connected and valued and listened to. Activity in the end is going to replace that purpose. So it's going to be building these routines in our life that are going to ultimately replace some of these busted ways of meeting our needs. And so that's going to be a big piece of the grandiosity and how the activity is going to really meet that need. The routines are going to constantly be deactivating the delusion. And it creates this environment that we can start doing some of this other work. So if I build up an activity schedule where we're constantly deactivating the delusion, then we can start looking at other ways that we can meet those needs. And so we really create an environment that the individual can look at the ways that they're thinking, the ways that they're approaching situations, what's making them feel better, what's making them feel worse. When are the times that they're feeling more disrespected, and how do they get those in a more effective way? So once they have an environment where we can evaluate their thoughts a little bit more, some stuff that's going to feel like real traditional CBT is what we're going to work on. So the way of thinking about a grandiose delusion and the way that we approach a grandiose delusion is a lot the way a pumpkin rots. I don't know if anybody here's ever seen when they if you've ever had a pumpkin at home, um, and you leave for work in the morning, and there's like a little black spot on the pumpkin, and then you come back at the end of the day, and the whole pumpkin has sort of folded in and is completely rotten. And it seems like it comes out of nowhere. But ultimately, the idea is that we're going to work at this from the inside out. We're not going to be looking at the stimuli necessarily in their environment and trying to get those undermined. What we're really going to do is sort of meet the need of those beliefs from the inside out. As they need the defense a little bit less, ultimately the grandiose delusion sort of folds in on itself. And so that's really what it's going to be. It's sort of the pumpkin rotting approach. Don't you like my really technical terms for Monday mornings? So that's really, the CTR protocol creates the environment within which we're going to start doing some of that work to rot the pumpkin from the inside out. So that leads us to this sense of correcting the thinking patterns, right? So as we're doing this regularly, and I can't stress enough that this approach here has to be done predictably. So this is really where you want the work at. So when I've seen people who've been the most successful at helping these individuals, they spend a lot of time doing this protocol for a good amount of time. Almost like if you think about the way we describe the medicine working, how you want to get the medicine into the bloodstream for a while. This protocol has to sort of get into their bloodstream, right? Very predictably. And this actually maps right onto traditional theories of cognitive therapy. So if you think about the way that we envision and understand some of their, if we really think about the way that we have traditionally thought about beliefs, beliefs change really slowly. I think a lot of times we imagine that we could just go really quickly, but that's what we're going to be doing. So this experience that we've got, that's going to get the individual to slowly sort of correct the belief for them. So once the individual is really in that place, once the delusion is really stabilized, that's when we really want to sort of plug up the hole in the bottom of the bucket, right? So the experiences stop draining out. It's really once we've stabilized is such a really technical term, but not technical, but it's a very sort of pathological term. But really sort of once the person's predictably, like when you show up, they're not starting by going, well, I'm the governor, right? But if they're like, oh, hey, you want to see what I cooked last night? It came out really good. Or I took a picture of what I cooked, right? We should be, as I show up, those are the things that they're talking about. Once that happens, we'll start identifying some of the patterns of behavior. And again, if we think about classic cognitive therapy concepts, right, there are ways that we sort of selectively abstract the information, right, or we discount some of the information that we've got. And so those are some of the ways in which individuals are going to continue to either prevent themselves from filling that bucket, right? So that need isn't being met as much, or as they're meeting the need, it's draining out, right? And so those are some of the problems that we're going to do. So we want to look at those patterns. When they go into a situation and they go to their family, are they jumping to a conclusion? Are they sort of paying attention to the fact that their grandfather isn't saying anything nice to them and then forgetting that other people are being nice to them? Are they, which is selective abstraction, right? So grandpa's not nice, but everybody else is nice. I selectively pull out that information about the way grandpa is acting toward me. On the flip side, let's say everybody is fine to me, and then, but that's not good enough. Nobody's really excited to see me. But listen, we've been having dinner together for like 4 weeks because we're all stuck in a house together. So the idea that people are going to roll out like a parade when you come downstairs probably isn't going to be it. So maybe I'm sort of discounting the positives. Um, Also, there may be this idea that if only if I'm the head and the most important will I be successful. Well, helping individuals to recognize that a true leader leads from the front and leads from the back, right? So, a really good governor, a really good leader in times of a crisis will both be a leader out front when he or she needs to, but also a really good governor will follow their experts. And so helping individuals practice that you don't need to be the most important person in order to be the most important person. And so helping our individuals grasp onto some of those ideas and feeling comfortable in those situations. Ultimately, we can help them start developing these new routines of thinking. So even if people are disrespectful to them, does that mean that you are not of value? Even if somebody doesn't listen to you, does that mean that you are ignored? So why are we looking for the people who are not helpful versus why are we looking at the people who are not helping and who are not valuing us? If I spend all of my energy trying to convince the person who doesn't value me, right, who knocks me down, well, then I miss all of these other people who I have a chance to connect with. My wife once sent me this wonderful meme that said, "Spread your light and the darkness will recede of its own." And so this idea of if I spend all of my time trying to drum away all the darkness, all of the not good people, I'm not spreading my light. Ironically, or interestingly, if you look into things like 12 steps, a lot of the 12-step folks really, a lot of the 12-step individuals read things like the Big Book. In the Big Book, Bill W., who is sort of the creator of Alcoholics Anonymous, he actually says, if you find an alcoholic, offer him the information about Alcoholics Anonymous. If he says no, offer it again. If he still says no, go find somebody else because other people need your help and this person's is not in a place to do it. And so this is a helpful thing for individuals with grandiose delusions to learn, right? Really making sure that I can not always trying to convince one person, but going out and connecting with lots of different people. As we start doing these other ways of connecting and other ways of leading, it's going to reduce the activation of the unhelpful beliefs, and also then by extension the grandiose delusions. So, for example, if I can learn that just by supporting my family, I'm really important and I'm valued, right? So I don't have to be the leader and I don't have to be in charge. Well, then I'm not activating the ideas of being ignored and disrespected and and disposable. Because every time I support my family, I'm actually being really important and I'm being a really good leader. And so we're figuring out sort of new patterns of thinking. It takes time, right? This approach takes time and consistency. And so the idea of that this needs to get into the blood system, that this approach needs to get into the individual's mind and have them get used to it. We can't drive this home enough. And when we've got families that we're helping with this, helping them understand that it's got to be regular and consistent, right? If they're getting into arguments with their loved one about the fact that they're not the governor of New York, it's not going to be helpful. First, help them, first validate why they want to do it. Secondly, have them evaluate, has it worked? Ask, how many times have you said that your son isn't the governor of New York? How many times have you told your daughter that she doesn't have a million babies? Okay. Did you try it again? Okay, good. So then what's the question, right? Have we ever been successful? If we haven't been successful, let's try something else. And then we can give them the formulation of it. That's the idea that it's really defending for them. So figuring out the ways that we can meet the needs and really teaching them these approaches of activation so that they can be a little bit more effective and ultimately reduce the presence of the grandiose delusion. We're not trying to appease the loved one or tell them that it's true. We're just trying to meet the need for them. So the individual is really going to need to have that need met and over a longer period of time. Once we really get the grandiose delusion deactivated, it really opens up the door. And it opens up the door under the idea of, does this make you feel better? Does this make you feel worse? Those types of things. Again, my name is Dr. Aaron Brinen. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry at Drexel's College of Medicine, and I look forward to continuing this with you guys. With that, let's stop share. Well, let's share, but I'm going to stop sharing and see what questions we've got. Oh. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah. Hey, Brittany.
Hey, I was wondering, I've had a couple of people who have like somehow about it come out very directly and been like, I know you don't believe me, or do you believe me about XYZ grandiose delusion? And I guess I wondered how you handle that.
So some of the ways that I've dealt with that. So I always have two questions when I get that, right? So the first thing is this: there might be something I always ask myself. See, I used to do a live training on this, and then I found that I wasn't really coming into that question a lot. So whenever I've gotten that, my brain goes to two evaluation points. One of my evaluation points is there something that I'm doing that is communicating to the individual that I'm not believing them? Right? Is there a way that I'm questioning them, or have I sort of started to allude to the idea that I don't think that it's true? So that's sort of question number one that I get into. The other thing I start doing is really starting to think about what's going on in their environment. So if I'm like, okay, I feel like I've done my usual jam, so it doesn't make sense that it would be me. I want to understand what the environment is. So I would say that the last person who came in who's like, you need to understand that I'm God. I went, okay, like what's going on? Because I just, they walked in the door and they had me like right between the eyeballs. I went, whoa. And sure as shooting, the family had been arguing with this person, was telling the person what they do. So their beliefs had gone through the roof. And they came in just fired up. And I've seen that a couple of times when like somebody gets maybe a new worker who works with them and starts challenging the very beliefs. So one of the things that I'll sometimes start with is apologizing that there must be something that I've done that's giving them the sense that I don't believe them. And whatever that is, I want to figure that out because I don't, I am not in the place of wanting you to feel like we're not on the same page. And so, and just see, even asking, is there something that I've done? I can see, and really I go after the affect that the individual presents. So the individual usually is presenting with a frustration or something like that. The other time I might go is, so what's let you know that I don't believe you? So where's that, and kind of directly asking, so is there something that I've done that lets you know that I don't believe you? And if they go, well, do you? I go, well, hold on, I want to come back to this. But, I find that anytime I walk into somebody and go, you don't believe me, it's usually because there's something that's gone on between us and I'm unhappy with that person. So whether I believe you or whether I don't believe you, there is unhelpful because there's something going on between us. Also, by the way, if you're feeling like I don't believe you, if I tell you that I believe you, are you going to believe me? And sometimes that breaks them. They start laughing. I go, listen, let's say I say, yes, I totally believe you. Are you going to believe me? And sometimes they go, and they might start to laugh or go, oh, I guess I wouldn't, I wouldn't really do that. So those are some of the ways that I go about it. And then ultimately, I might create enough space to go, well, what's good about being God? I am God. Okay. So then you can tell me. So I could see a lot of benefits. I could see a lot of downsides, right? To being God. So I just want to know for you, what's good about being God? So is that helpful, Brittany?
Yes.
Hey, Gus here. So first of all, I would like to hear the question that was thought of. But so I wanted to know, like, what is your process for, like, if somebody has a delusion, what's your process for figuring out what that underlying need is? Is it do you kind of just get it, like it just comes to you, or is there kind of a process that you go through to figure it out?
So the process that I go to, so the process usually goes like this. Partly because that gets actually a little bit to what Brittany was saying, is that that oftentimes early on there's if I just start when I meet with somebody. Okay, so I'm sorry. There's two things. One, when I come in, I need some way to, especially if I know that there's this idea that I'm, say, the governor of New York. Um, I need a way of coming in and sort of striking in there, so I get an individual talking back to me, not getting lectured about the importance of social distancing and whether de Blasio should have closed the schools or not. Like, that's not going to be a helpful. There's no good way of getting in there, right? And so initially, what I need to do is I need to figure out, if I show up and somebody goes, "This is a really important doctor from Drexel University who's coming to check in on your therapy and on your medicine." This individual who believes that they're the governor of New York State I'm going to get like 100% governor right between the eyeballs. So I need a way to pivot and ultimately get in with activation immediately. And so I'm going to start by asking myself the very questions: what's good about being governor? People listen to you. You're important. You're respected. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not, but they're just my initial hypotheses, right? So I'm going off just a generic formulation. Once that happens, I'm going to strike in with an activation piece of it, right? So I might ask them some advice. Hey, I've never been to Chester County. What would be good about, I've never been down to Chester County before. Is there a good place to go eat? Right? So I'm going after being respected, valued, important, right? Boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom. Right? And I'm going to hit those things up. Then, as we're talking about it, I might deactivate the delusion enough. At that point, it confirms I was sort of on the money for a couple of these things. I sort of was something here was right. And so if something I was saying was right, well, now I'm going to come back around and I'm going to continue to push on those to see which of those it is. If the person starts talking to me about being the governor, that's when I ask, okay, I'm curious, what's good about being governor? What are you able to do? What are you able to get? And at that point, I'm going to find out, they're going to tell me, well, people listen to you. I'm respected. And then I've got lots of people to protect me. I've got to protect me. And so at that point, I know that there may be some fears the person has, but it also tells me some of the things they want. And then I'm going to start that process. Ultimately, then I fall into trying to activate the competing set of beliefs. Also trying to figure out how do we get the person active in their own life. At that point down the road, I want to sort of shore that up so it happens automatically and we're not activating those beliefs. So that's sort of the process. Hypothetical, I'm going to gather data from the individual and then develop a series of information afterwards. So is that helpful, Gus?
Very much. Thank you.
Awesome. That's going twice. Brittany, you're up.
Okay, so the thing that made me think of was it was the same individual when I was trying to say what's good about the thing that they believed. At one point they were like, I think this other, like, it was like the devil, is making you ask me that because what they ultimately ended up saying was like, to say what's good about something is narcissism. And then I kind of got stuck a little because I was like, how else do I? Because it became such a natural question for me to ask. I didn't know how.
Right.
Like, what other ways could you ask it or target it?
So I think that's one of those things where it's a baby bathwater situation, right? So it's a good question. It's the right question to ask. And this person, their process is um, whatever the process that they're going through is leading them in that direction. So you were fine, you did it right, you nailed it. And then this is why I love what I do. It's always exciting, it's always an adventure. And so at that point, what I would where you can sort of come around is going, that sounds about right. It is a pretty narcissistic question to ask, and that could be really bad. Because in my mind, so actually, I'm going to ask you, not to put you on the spot, what's your thought process? What beliefs are being activated, either about others or about themselves, when you ask that question, and that would lead the devil, which might be a hallucination as well, to say that to them. So, because remember, whatever that is, whether it's a voice or whether it's a belief, is being driven out of their own belief schema or their own belief system. So, why do you think that they did that? I'm not trying to challenge you, but
Yeah, it's okay. They had a lot of lack of capability beliefs and a lot of lack of connection beliefs, and they had another belief about having like infinite powers and stuff like that. So, I mean, in that moment, they were in the hospital and feeling pretty powerless. And
okay.
I think that being humble also connected them to being godlike, because like Christ taught. I don't know, that sort of virtue. And so I think that was maybe in a sense like taking back capability, because they had this belief that they were the second coming of Christ.
Okay, so there's this piece of it where, thank you. That's really good. I agree with all of those things. I also wonder. I always think of like that. Whenever the devil acts, it's usually a sign that somebody, there's a questioning of. There's a defense. It's essentially a sort of like a psychotic version of defensiveness. And so, I also would wonder if, let's see a piece of it. So I think there's a piece of it that could be coming up from just sort of like defensiveness, or sort of like questioning your motives. The minute I question my motives, I externalize that and I intentionalize it. Right? If we think about the thinking biases of delusions, things happen for an external reason, the devil, and it's happening for an intentional negative reason. So intentional negative is going to be the devil doing it. And so trying to figure that stuff out, we can validate it and go, yeah, I could see why it would be. I can see why it would be. Why it would seem like the devil might ask a question like that, and why it might seem narcissistic to do that, right? And then going, so I'm curious though, if you want to answer the question though, and just kind of coming right back around going, and saying, no, I genuinely want to know it. What's good about these things. It seems like it would be a lot of work to be the second coming of Christ. Just saying, seems like a lot of work. So I'm curious what's good about it. And so just kind of coming back around, but just validating that stuff, because it's the doubts and the concerns, because it's not our individuals' first rodeos. And so I always say that I'm not sitting in front of I always think that I'm not sitting in front of my individuals. That a lot of, basically every therapist that they've had before me is sitting with me in front of the individual. And so I might ask the person a question, but the 5 people before them that said, you're crazy, you have schizophrenia, and you need to accept that your life is over, those people are sitting behind me as I ask what's good about being the second coming of Christ. And they're like, all this other stuff, they're like, oh, you're like that other guy. So, but cool. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Well, my friends, thank you for spending your Monday morning with me. If it's rainy, stay dry. If it's sunny, wear sunscreen. And if it's something else, do something else. Thank you guys. It was really great. I will see you guys Friday, where we're going to really talk about guided discovery and sort of correcting beliefs. And I will see you guys then. If anybody, I can ever be of service, let me know. So thanks so much. Be safe. And I will see you guys the next one. Bye.